I know I'm not here, so I thought maybe the best thing that I could do would be to do this lesson online for you so that you would know what you're doing. So I'll go quickly through this. So you have the notes up here, and we're continuing to look at character and more than just physical traits and character traits. You guys did a nice job explaining those yesterday. I want to talk about characters and how they're impacted by events in the story. Characters go through many, many changes through the course of a story. Otherwise, we'd have a pretty dull story if your main character, or even some of the major characters, don't change. Now, we've already learned about different character types: static, dynamic, flat, and round. Well, most likely your main character is going to be a dynamic character. They change throughout the course of the story. Um, Sometimes you'll have a major character or even a main character occasionally that doesn't change, but most of the time you're going to see that the character makes some sort of change. Either and there's a variety of different ways that they can change. And if they didn't, what a snooze fest. What a boring story if your character stayed the same the whole time. So, let's talk about this. Why is it the characters change? Well, there's a lot of different reasons, but mostly it's the result of things they've experienced in their lives, things that they've gone through, things that they've lived through. Things happen to them that change them, and they experience things. I want you to think about a time that you experienced something and it changed you. Certainly, you explored that idea somewhat in the memoir. So maybe there's a time, let's say, for instance, that you decided you were going to bully your little brother or sister, okay? And then that night, you did that, and your brother or sister got very, very sad or cried or whatever. If it impacted you a certain way, you might think twice about doing it again. And that's just a small example. Most of the time, our characters in our books, they make much bigger changes. So why do they change? Well, things happen to them in the story. That's number one. Number two, a lot of times characters are faced with a difficult choice. They have to make a choice. And then after they've made that choice, they make a decision, they have to live with the results of that, whether the consequences of that decision are good or they're bad. A lot of times it's both. Okay? And then they live through things that shape their personality, outlook, and how they act. Imagine, ladies and gentlemen, if you had to go serve in a war. Okay, I just want you to think about that. Imagine you were sent in the battle with a gun for months at a time. You're sleeping out in the wilderness. You're seeing terrible things happening all around you. I want you to think about when you came back to the United States, how that would change your outlook, how that would change you. Okay, now imagine, on a happier example, imagine if you were to go study in another country. Think about what you would come back with and how that might have changed you. Think about what you would have learned and how students in other countries do things. Now, to make a real easy example, you've got this guy, Darth Vader. Now, if you don't know much about Star Wars, you can still get a good idea. You probably know enough to know that Darth Vader is a bad dude, okay? His goal is to eliminate the Jedi Alliance, which are the so-called good guys, all right? So you might say to yourself, this guy's a pretty static character. He is just the bad guy who's out to kill all the good guys, all right? Well, but it's not that simple, and it almost never is. If you know anything about Darth Vader, you know he's one bad dude overall. However, it's a lot more complex than that, and there's two giant changes that Darth Vader went through. First of all, for those of you who know Star Wars, you know he was actually, before, he was Anakin Skywalker, which was a Jedi. But then he went through some very tragic stuff that caused him to turn into Darth Vader, the bad guy. But then in Return of the Jedi, he actually saves his son Luke Skywalker from the Emperor who's trying to kill him. Because, well, I don't want to give it anything away, but clearly he comes back to being a so-called good guy. So here you have who's considered a very evil guy who actually at the end makes this giant change from one of the most feared men in the universe to someone who saves his sworn enemy, his son. So these are just some examples, and we're just gonna want you to think about as you're reading Freak the Mighty or some of the books, think about how your characters change, and more importantly, what changes them.